rejected by his own kind. Years later, they couldn't believe their eyes, the one that didn't belong. He was born at dusk when the sky over the savannah turned the color of dying fire. The other cubs arrived first, golden, warm, already carrying the scent of the pride. He came last, smaller, still, and when his mother licked the dust from his face, every lion nearby went quiet. His fur was almost white, not pale gold, not cream, white, like dried bone, like the riverbed in August, like something that had no business existing under an African sun. His eyes, still adjusting to the light, were a shade of pale amber that caught the dusk in an unsettling way. A smudge of darker fur traced his left ear. That was the only marking that said, "I am still one of you." His mother, Nala, pressed her nose to his side and exhaled slowly. She knew what the silence meant. Every lion in the pride knew. The savannah does not reward things that stand out. It never has. In those first days, the cubs approached him with the blunt curiosity of the young. They sniffed his strange coat, pawed at him without warmth, then wandered back to the pile of golden fur they called home. Not cruel yet, just indifferent, the way nature always is before it makes up its mind. The pride's dominant male, a broad-shouldered lion the others deferred to without question, watched from a flat rock near the acacia trees. He didn't approach, didn't growl. He observed the white cub the way a lion observes a change in wind direction, with patience, and with the understanding that something would need to be done about it eventually. Nala stayed close. She groomed him longer than the others, fed him first when she could. At night she curled her body around his in a way that said not yet to anything that might come too close. But she couldn't be everywhere. During the first group rest, when the pride settled into a warm, tangled silence under the shade of a wide thorn tree, the white cub tried to nest himself between two older cubs. One of them shifted, then the other. Not aggressively, just enough. A slow, wordless closing of space that left him on the edge of the group, pressed against nothing, facing the open savannah alone. He didn't whimper. He looked out at the flat golden distance for a long moment. Then he lay down where he was. The pride slept. The white cub stayed awake a little longer than the rest, watching the grass move in the afternoon heat, as if already learning to read what others ignored. Have you ever watched someone be pushed to the edges, not through cruelty, but through silence, and said nothing? The first hunt he was allowed to join was also the first time he understood what he truly was to them. Not a cub, not a threat, something worse, a liability. 3 months had passed since his birth. The dry season had begun to sharpen the edges of everything. The grass turned brittle and pale, the watering hole shrank by a foot, and the pride moved with the focused economy of animals that knew hunger was not theoretical. It was coming. It was already here in the way the older lions breathed at night. Slower, more deliberate, conserving without being told to. The white cub had grown, not as fast as the others. His frame was leaner, his paws still too large for his body, but he had grown. His fur had not darkened. If anything, the dry season made it stranger. Under the bleached midday sun, he almost disappeared into the light. At dusk, when the golden cubs dissolved into the grass, he stood out like something left behind by the world. He knew, the way young animals know things before they have words for them, that being seen was a problem. The first hunting formation came together just before dawn. 4 adult lionesses fanned out low through the grass, moving toward a small herd of impala grazing near a dry riverbed. The older cubs followed at a distance, tucked behind the adults, learning by watching. It was the natural order: observe, then participate, then lead. He followed too. But 20 meters into the approach, one of the lionesses, a broad-faced female named Saba, second in the hierarchy, stopped and looked back. She held the white cub in her gaze for a long moment. Then, without a sound, she moved 2 steps to the side, placing herself deliberately between him and the formation ahead. A wall, not a violent one, just a wall. He tried to go around her. She moved again. The message was wordless, but absolute. Stay back. The other cubs were already moving forward. 4 golden shapes dissolving into the golden grass, becoming invisible, becoming part of the hunt. He stood at the edge and watched the impala scatter and the lionesses surge in a perfect silent explosion of coordination. He watched all of it from the outside. The hunt succeeded. The pride fed. He was allowed to eat, but last, after the adults, after the other cubs, After even the younger females who hadn't participated, he ate what remained, which was enough to survive on, not enough to grow strong. Nala stayed close during the feeding, her flank pressed against his. She was not apologizing. Lions do not apologize. But there was something in the way she stayed, a deliberate weight, a quiet presence, that said, "I see you. I am here." It didn't change what had happened, but it was something. That night, at the edge of the pride's resting place, the white cub did not sleep right away. He watched the grass move in the dark. He watched the direction the impala had fled. He watched the ridge of rocks to the east where the shadows gathered differently, where the terrain broke into angles and stone. He was already learning a different geometry of the world, not the open plain that rewarded camouflage, but the terrain that didn't require it. The rocky outcrops, the pre-dawn light, the angles where white was not a weakness. He didn't know yet that he was building something. 3 days later, when the pride began moving south, following the last reliable water, he was still there when they looked back. The question was not whether he could keep up. The question was whether they would let him try. He didn't understand it was goodbye until the dust settled and there was nothing left to follow. The pride moved before sunrise. No signal, no sound, just the collective decision of bodies that had already agreed sometime in the night, while he slept at the edge of the group, with one ear turned to the wind. By the time he opened his eyes, they were shapes in the dark. By the time he was on his feet, they were almost gone. He ran. Not fast enough to close the gap, but fast enough to keep them in sight. Golden forms moving south through the tall, dry grass, their pace unhurried but constant, the kind of pace that covers ground without appearing to. He knew that pace. He had watched it for months. He had never been asked to match it until now, when matching it was the only thing that mattered. For nearly 2 hours he followed at a distance, close enough to track them, far enough that no one turned back for him. No one turned back. The terrain began to shift. The flat savanna gave way to a section of dense scrub and narrow gullies carved by rivers that no longer ran. The pride moved through it easily. They knew this land, had crossed it before, carried its map in their muscles. He stumbled where they glided, lost sight of them twice in the thick brush, found their scent again both times and kept moving. The third time, the scent split. He stopped, lifted his head. The air carried 2 directions, one fading south, the other circling back, sharp and deliberate. Before he could process it, Saba was there. She stepped out from behind a dead acacia, calm and unhurried, and placed herself between him and the direction the pride had gone. She didn't growl. She didn't need to. Her posture said everything that the pride had already decided in the dark. This is where you stop. He tried to move past her. She shifted her weight forward, not aggressive, just immovable, and he pulled back. He tried again. She didn't flinch. They stood like that for a long moment. The wind moved through the dry grass. Somewhere south, the pride was already getting smaller. Then Saba turned and walked away. Not back toward him. Not south. She simply left, disappearing into the brush at an angle, her job done. A border had been drawn. She was returning to the other side of it. He stood alone in the scrub for a long time. The sounds of the pride faded completely. The savanna filled the silence the way it always does. Insects, wind, the distant bark of something unseen. The world did not pause for what had just happened. It never does. He was 8 months old. His fur was white as dry salt. His ribs showed faintly beneath it. He had no territory, no kill, no pride. He had the rocky gully behind him, and the open plain ahead, and a body that was still deciding what it was going to become. He did not go south. He turned east, toward the ridge of rocks he had been watching for months from the edge of camp. The broken terrain, the ledges, the shadows that fell differently at dawn. The place where golden fur would be no advantage. He walked toward it slowly, the way animals walk when they are not yet sure the ground will hold. But he walked. He almost died on the 4th day, not from a predator, not from thirst, from a mistake. The kind that only happens when a young animal tries something its body isn't ready for and the ground doesn't forgive the attempt. He had been stalking a young warthog along a narrow rock ledge above a dry gully when the stone gave way beneath his rear leg. He caught himself on the edge with one paw, hung there for a moment that stretched longer than it should have, and then pulled himself back up through something closer to instinct than skill. He lay flat on the warm rock for a long time after that, breathing, not moving. The warthog was long gone. That was the beginning of his education. The rocky ridge he had chosen was not kind terrain. It was a system of broken sandstone shelves, steep gullies, and narrow passes that connected to a wider plateau to the northeast. Nothing large lived here permanently. It was too exposed, too uneven, too far from water to be a home. But things passed through: warthogs, hares, the occasional young impala that had strayed from its herd, small enough prey for a young lion hunting alone, enough to survive on, if he was patient. Patience was the first thing the rocks taught him. On the open savanna, lions hunt with speed and coordination. The flat ground rewards explosive force. The group rewards specialization. Here, alone, on uneven terrain, speed was secondary. He learned to wait, to choose a position above a narrow pass and stay motionless for hours, reading the wind, watching the patterns of movement below. He learned that prey animals follow routine more rigidly than predators do, and that routine, once understood, becomes a map. He made mistakes, many of them. He misjudged distances. He moved too early. He underestimated the noise his own body made on loose stone. He went hungry for stretches that left him lightheaded and slow. But each failure was specific. It told him exactly what had gone wrong, and the rocks were patient enough to let him try again. His white fur, which had marked him as wrong in the pride's world, behaved differently here. At dawn, when the eastern sky turned pale and the sandstone glowed with the same bleached warmth as his coat, he became difficult to read against the rock. Not invisible. Nothing is ever truly invisible, but ambiguous, a shape that the eye passed over without locking on. He began to plan his hunts around that window of light, positioning himself before sunrise, waiting for the moment when the world turned the same color as his body. He was not adapting despite his difference. He was adapting through it. 3 months passed this way, then 4. He grew, slowly at first, then with sudden, almost startling speed, the way predators grow when they finally find enough food to match their frame. His shoulders broadened. The lean, exposed quality of his early months filled out into something denser, more deliberate. The white fur thickened and took on a texture that caught light differently depending on the hour. Silver at dusk, almost luminous before dawn, flat and pale and unreadable at midday. He had no pride to compare himself to, no hierarchy to measure himself against. He grew into his size without an audience, which meant he grew into it honestly. By the end of the 5th month alone, he had established a rough territory across the ridge and the plateau beyond it, not claimed aggressively, but worn into existence through repetition, his scent on the rocks, his paths through the narrow passes, the places he returned to reliably, which is how territory always begins. He did not know what was happening 70 kilometers south. He did not know that the pride he had been left behind by was facing something it had not faced before. A coalition of younger males pressing in from the east, harder and faster than anything Tao's aging body was built to handle anymore. He did not know any of it. He was learning the rocks, and the rocks were making him into something the savannah had not seen before. He heard them before he saw them. 3 males, moving fast through the eastern corridor, following the same dry riverbed that connected the plateau to the lower savannah. He picked up their scent first, sharp, unfamiliar, carrying the specific aggression of lions that have been winning. Then their sound, the low rhythmic contact calls of a coordinated group, not hunting, just moving, the way a force moves when it already knows where it's going. He watched them from the ridge above. They were large. The oldest had a dark mane that had fully grown in, thick across the chest and shoulders. The other 2 were younger but heavier than him, built for open ground confrontations where mass and momentum decide everything quickly. They moved through the corridor without pausing, without checking the high ground. They had no reason to look up. Nothing had ever challenged them from above. He stayed motionless on the rock ledge and watched them pass beneath him. They were heading south. He knew that direction. He knew what was south, not with sentiment, not with longing, but the way any animal knows its origin point. It was coded into him. A coordinate system laid down in the first months of his life before everything changed. South was where the pride was. South was where Nala still moved through the grass at dusk, where the watering hole sat at the base of the flat-topped hill, where a younger version of himself had eaten last and watched the others sleep. He had not thought about it in months. There was no useful reason to think about it. He thought about it now. The 3 males disappeared around a bend in the riverbed, and the sounds faded. He remained on the ledge for a long time after, the way he had learned to remain still, not from hesitation but from the habit of processing before acting, which the rocks had built into him slowly and without ceremony. What happened in the next hour surprised him. Though animals do not experience surprise the way people do, it is less a feeling than a recalibration, the body adjusting to a decision the instincts made before the rest of the animal caught up. He came down from the ridge. He followed them south, not quickly, not with the reckless urgency of something driven by emotion. He moved the way he had learned to move on uneven ground, deliberate, energy efficient, reading the terrain ahead in the same way he read the wind before a hunt. He was not chasing them. He was simply moving in the same direction, which is a different thing entirely. It took the better part of a day and a half. The landscape shifted as he moved south. The broken rock of the plateau smoothed back into flat savanna. The scrub opened into the long grass he remembered. The shadows shortened and the heat flattened everything into the familiar, bleached stillness of the dry season afternoon. The air smelled different here, older, more layered, carrying the scent marks of a pride that had held this ground for years. He stopped at the edge of a low rise and looked down. The scene below was not yet at its worst, but it was close. The three males had arrived. Tao, heavier now but slower, his mane grayer along the jaw, was positioned at the center of the pride's ground, holding posture against the coalition with the particular stillness of an animal that knows it is outmatched, but has not yet decided to accept that. The lionesses had drawn back. The cubs were already gone, moved to the far edge of the brush by instinct. The younger of the three invading males was circling, testing the edges. From the rise he watched all of it. He was not part of this. He had not been part of anything here for nearly 2 years. He owed this pride nothing that could be named or measured. They had left him in dry scrub at 8 months old with no ceremony and no apology, and the savannah had not asked him to carry that as debt or as wound. He understood all of that. He also understood what was below him, and what would happen in the next few minutes if nothing changed. He filled his lungs with the dry afternoon air, and then the white lion, alone, unhurried, owing nothing to anyone, opened his mouth and let the sound come up from somewhere below thought, below memory, below everything except the oldest part of what he was. The roar crossed the savannah like weather. Every animal below stopped. The three males looked up at the same time. That was the first thing. Not fear, not yet, but the involuntary redirection of attention that happens when something enters a situation that doesn't fit the existing calculation. They had assessed this ground. They had assessed Tao. They had not assessed the ridge. He came down from the rise slowly, not charging, not performing. He moved the way he had learned to move on the plateau, with the unhurried, wait-forward deliberateness of an animal that has never needed to announce itself because it has learned that presence, done correctly, announces itself. The white fur caught the late afternoon light and held it in a way that golden fur never could. He was not camouflage here. He was not trying to be. He was visible, entirely, deliberately visible. The oldest of the three males, the one with the dark mane, held his ground and issued a low warning, a sound meant to establish the boundary between what he controlled and what he didn't. The white lion walked through it the way wind walks through grass. He stopped 20 meters from the coalition and stood. What happened next lasted less than a minute, but would have been almost impossible to explain to someone who had not watched animals their whole life. No charge was made. No blood was drawn. The dark-maned male took one step forward, then stopped, looked, recalculated. The white lion did not move, did not posture, did not make a sound. He simply remained, with the absolute stillness of something that has spent 2 years learning that the ground beneath it will hold. The youngest of the three shifted his weight backward. Then the middle one turned his head slightly. Not retreat, but the micro-adjustment that precedes it. The body deciding before the animal consciously agrees. The dark-maned male held a moment longer. His eyes moved across the white lion's frame, the broad shoulders, the unbothered stance, the territory scent coming off him in layers that said, "This is not new. This is not borrowed. This has been earned on ground harder than yours." He turned. The coalition left the way dominant animals always leave when they choose to, without running, without any visible hurry, as if the departure had been their own idea. They moved northeast, back up the corridor, and the savannah absorbed them the way it absorbs everything eventually. Silence came back gradually. The lionesses emerged from the brush first, then the cubs, cautious and low to the ground. Tao stood where he had been, older and stiller than before, and did not speak, because lions do not speak. But his posture changed in a way that said something had been transferred that could not be taken back. The pride gathered at a distance and watched the white lion. He did not go to them. He stood at the edge of the ground he had defended and looked south, toward the open savanna that stretched beyond the pride's territory into distances he hadn't mapped yet. His breathing was even. His body was unhurried. There was no performance of victory, no circling the space to claim it. None of the display that comes from needing others to confirm what you already know. Nala came closest. She stopped 10 meters away and held his gaze for a long moment, the particular direct gaze that carries recognition across every distance. He looked back at her. A breath passed between them. Then she lowered her head slightly, not in submission exactly, but in the way that one animal acknowledges another when there is nothing left to argue about. He turned north. He walked back the way he had come, toward the plateau, the broken rock, the passes where shadows fell differently at dawn. The pride watched him go. No one followed. No one called after him. The savanna was quiet in the specific way it gets quiet when something has just been settled. He did not look back. Not because the past held nothing. It held everything, every scar and hunger and cold night at the edge of a group that had not wanted him. He carried all of it. But he carried it the way strong animals carry weight, distributed evenly, built into the body, no longer requiring attention. The white fur caught the last light of the afternoon as he climbed back toward the ridge. From a distance, in that particular hour, he was almost difficult to see, not because he was hiding, but because the world had finally arranged itself around him correctly. He reached the plateau as the first stars appeared. He lay down on the warm, flat rock he had returned to every night for 2 years, faced the open dark, and was still. Below, 70 kilometers south, a pride settled into uneasy sleep around a territory that was no longer entirely their own and not entirely his. No one could say what it was now. Maybe that was the point. Is it possible that the things that excluded you were quietly building the version of you that no one will ever be able to exclude again? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments.